Okay, share, copy. Let's go to remind. Send. All right, Nearpod. Let's link. Copy the link. Go to all right, ladies and gentlemen. My apologies for being a little bit late. I was actually in the process of finishing everything up, and then I got an email saying that I had to go in for an AP session, and that's where I've been for the past 30, 40 minutes now, is actually in that AP meeting online. So I talked with Mr. Sampson, as well as Dr. McCoy Thomas, and here are some of the things that you need to know. Number one, if you did not make I need you to go to myap.collegeboard.org and make sure you can still sign into your AP account. We created those at the beginning of the year. I know you might not remember your password. If that's the case, then you can actually reset your password through there. Or if you signed on with your ebrschools.org, they will give you a actual phone number in which you can go ahead and call them and make sure you can get into the AP session. The reason being is that you do have the AP test coming up that is still a go. I believe they've actually switched it to, want to say, I'll have to double check it. I think it's going to be on May 12th. May 12th at 3 p.m. If you do not take the AP test, then, well, we're going to have to find some way around that one. Also, for those of you who are taking the AP test, if you cheat, and this is going to be the major thing, if you cheat on the AP test, it's going to go and follow you throughout your entire college career. It doesn't matter what college you're going to. If you sign up for LSU, try to go to LSU, Southern, Southeastern, BRCC, the fact that you cheated on the AP test is going to follow you. In fact, they will not let you into college because of that. So that's the one thing that you need to remember. So first and foremost, make sure you go to myap.collegeboard.org. If you have not signed up for that in this class, I have put the link on Google Classroom so you can go ahead and get it done. Make sure you can sign into it. If you cannot remember your password, or if you signed on with your EBR email address, that ebr@ebrschools.org, you're going to have to go and call them and set that up so they can reset your password. They'll give you a temporary password to sign in. Once you've done that, you'll be able to set it with whatever password you want. Make sure you remember that password because Lord knows a lot of people, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have actually forgotten their password for that. All right, so moving on. Today we're going to be looking very briefly. I think there's only 20 slides or so with this next section. We're going to be looking at development. So you've already been doing that city planning project, and you're already trying to get people into your cities. In fact, I've already posted part 3 of the city planning project on Google Classroom. So it's already up there waiting for you. Essentially, that is asking you a couple of things about your city. Very quick, very easy. It also has some things when it comes to new urbanism and what you want to make sure your city has on there. So go ahead and make sure you take a look at that. Beyond that, development. I will be posting a Spanish translation of this as soon as I can. I usually do that in the mornings. Like I said, unfortunately, this morning I was actually brought out into that meeting, so I could not do that one. So development. Odds are, by this point in this class, you already have a pretty good idea of what development actually is. We've discussed more developed countries, less developed countries. So in your own words, what is development? I'll go ahead and move forward there. I'm currently seeing not everyone is online right now. That's fine. In fact, there's no one online at this current moment. So I'm just going to go ahead and move past this one. I will post this on Google Classroom, so you will have access to it. Just make sure you get these done so I can go back and check it, make sure you're signing onto this thing and you can get that credit on there. Because, ladies and gentlemen, even though we are not doing formal grades right now, we are still keeping tally of who's participating and who's actually doing things and who's actually getting questions right and wrong. That will actually be coming to a head at the very end, because we're going to find some way to reward those of you who are actually on this thing on a consistent basis and getting this done. So how would you describe development? And I wanted you to post a meme that helps you understand what development is. P.S. Keep those memes school appropriate. I don't want to see any, half-naked women or anything on there. Keep it school appropriate. No dirty language. You know the rules. School appropriate. So let's go forward. So development is a process of which we improve people's lives through the diffusion of both knowledge and technology. That's it. We can actually improve lives, improve cities by sharing knowledge and sharing technology and moving it from one place to another. All goes back to diffusion, cultural diffusion, all those different types of diffusion. This is how development happens. And because of that, we're having people have improved lives. So on this is slide number 5, you're seeing a map of more developed countries versus developing and less developed countries. The darker you are with blue, the more developed you are. So as you can see on this map, Japan is more developed. South Korea is more developed. Australia, New Zealand, almost all of Europe is more developed, as well as the United States, Canada, and one small country there in South America. I don't know what that is. Is that Guyana? Let me check. South America map. Maps. So the places on here in orange are going to be less developed. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, India, China, Egypt. Those have actually are not quite as advanced as the places in blue. And then in red, which is a large swath of Central Africa, plus a handful of places in Southeast Asia, are considered least developed. Those are countries that are kind of at the bottom rung. They have not gotten the same amount of development as these more developed countries has. In fact, they are considered what's called peripheral, and we'll talk about that one in a second. So with this next slide, I want you to give some examples of MDCs, more developed countries, and LDCs, and what factors help decide the difference between more developed and less developed. So go ahead, type those out. You can pause the video here, type out what you've got, and then come back to it once you're finished. We'll go back to the video. All right, next slide. Development. For a lot of people, development equals wealth. After all, the more wealth a country has, the more developed it will probably be. However, wealth does not only depend on what is being produced, but also how and where it's being produced. And another thing to know is that development is not always 100% positive. In the old saying, you can't have an omelet without cracking some eggs. In the case of development, you cannot have an omelet without cracking at least a dozen eggs and also having a little bit of waste on the side, spilling a little bit of oil there. So our next one's another collaborate board. What are some ways that development might be negative? You can go ahead, pause the video here and go ahead and type out your responses. Once again, make sure they are school appropriate. We're not here to judge differing opinions. However, you have to make sure you're keeping it something that you want acceptable should a administrator walk in. I mean, while I am lax with certain things, language and non-school appropriate things, I am not. So go ahead, pause the video here, answer the question. And once you're done, we'll move on. All right, slide number 9. Some problems of how development, some example development can be negative. First is the growth of inequality, whether it's income inequality or say maybe gender inequality in some cases. Another one, you have more pollution because more people equals more trash. Even then, that trash can be something like water pollution, like in my GIF here, or air pollution. It happens. There's some days you can't even see downtown Los Angeles because it's covered with brown haze. We have higher density and traffic. Needless to say, higher density causes sickness to move quicker through through a city. In fact, if you've ever wondered about social distancing, keeping that 6 foot apart from each other, this is one of the reasons, because the higher density development you have, you're going to end up having a lot more when it comes to disease, sicknesses. We have social problems, alcoholism, drug abuse, crime. We also have a greater frequency of certain health problems, not just disease, not just drugs, but also we've got things like heart disease. We've got obesity, heart attack, diabetes. We have a greater frequency of that happening in these developed countries than developing countries. Another big one would be cancer. Even though cancer rates are rather kind of same across the board when it comes to population, in developed countries, people get higher rates of cancer because they're living to having longer lifespans. Let's say your country, you have the average lifespan of 35. By the time you hit 35, you might get malaria and die. Or, even if you're a teenager, you might get malaria and die in these countries because there's no development there. Well, here in the United States, malaria is almost extinct. I think maybe it pops up once every couple of years. But even then, it doesn't spread very far. So in the United States, you're not going to die young of malaria, so you're going to live a little bit longer, and then you might get cancer. And if you know anything about aging in human beings and the human body, you'll know that as you age, your body starts to break down, and you're more susceptible to different things like cancer. So there is that. So different diseases you are more susceptible to. Not so much that it's more rampant here, but you're just living long enough that you have a greater risk for it. Where's my Nearpod? I don't know what happened to my Nearpod. 1 second. Son of a gun. Did I close out of that thing? I think I might have. Get back to it. All right. Live lesson and continue. All right. Sorry, I clicked off the tab and went to something else. And I tried to get back to it, and it suddenly disappeared on me. All right, so here's how we measure wealth. We can measure wealth by a couple of different metrics. The first one is called gross national product. And that's going to be the value of goods and services produced by a country's citizens and companies over a 1-year period. Now, it doesn't matter where in the world these things are being produced, but as long as they're being produced by American citizens or by American companies, it's considered part of the GNP, the gross national product. On this one, I've given you the example of a Nike factory in China. Because Nike is an American-owned company, these shoes, everything these factory workers are making, is going to be counting towards the United States GNP, our gross national product. Is it necessarily fair? Some people would say no, and I can't blame them on that. But this is part of how we measure that GNP. It's how much is being produced by American citizens or American companies gets counted. Now, our second one is called GDP. And if you were in my civics class last year, civics and econ, you probably remember this one, the gross domestic product. That's the total value of goods and services that are produced in a country over a 1-year period. It does not matter who creates those goods and services, but if they are produced in the United States in a certain year, within that 1-year period, they are counted towards GDP. And in this case, I have an example of a car factory, a car plant, Honda. There is a Honda car plant in Marysville, Ohio. They build Hondas. As you should know, if you haven't already, Honda is a Japanese company. But they produce cars all over the world, including the United States. So if Japan is building cars a Japanese company is building these cars in the United States, that goes towards the United States GDP. Because it doesn't matter who's doing it, but they're produced here in the United States. It's counted towards the GDP. And our third one is called gross national income. We calculate the monetary worth of everything that's produced inside of a country, plus the income from international investments. Right now, the United States is the highest. We are top of the heap when it comes to gross national income. Now, to calculate it, first you need to know the GDP. So you get the GDP total for, say, 2019. Then you calculate all the money that's flowing out of that country, all the money we're sending overseas to different areas or different communities or different organizations. And then you also calculate the money flowing into the country. Case in point, with our GDP, once we have that all set, we have to calculate what money is leaving the country and going to pay for, say, Honda's board of directors in Tokyo, Japan. Because needless to say, they're going to be getting their cut of these Honda cars. So we take our GDP and we add the money that's leaving us, and we also get the money that's flowing to us, such as those Nike workers. Those Nike shoes, they're being sold in the United States. So we're going to have money coming into the United States from those shoes. Now, our next measurement is called per capita GNI. So what we do is we look at the GNI per person in a country, and it's very simple to calculate. You divide the GNI of a country by that country's population. And the figure you're getting is your per capita GNI. Very quick, very easy. GDP plus the money flowing out from the country and the money flowing into the country. And that is your GNI. So here's our GNI per capita map. This is slide 13. And as you can see, anyone that's greater than $43,000 per person is going to be in dark blue. So you're seeing Australia, New Zealand, Germany is one, the United Kingdom, Ireland, the Nordic countries, Denmark, Sweden, Norway. Looks like Finland's part of it as well. And of course, the United States and Canada. All those places, their GNI, per capita GNI, is more than $43,000 per person. And as you can see there, the GNI, as you fade to white, you're going to have places with lower GNI. In fact, if your country is almost solid white, like Madagascar, then you've got your GNI, your gross national income, is being less than $840 per person. So this is something to remember. This is by person. Wealthier people are going to be living in the dark blue areas. And I don't just mean wealthier people like the 1% or the super rich, people like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. I'm talking about just on average. On average, the average person in the United States is wealthier than the average person in, say, India. So, informal versus formal economies. Now, informal economies are going to exist when economic activity is not being counted. And we usually see this in less developed countries. Typically, some of the markers of an informal economy, you have no taxes. There's usually small-scale trade and small-scale markets. You have economies based on barter. Hey, I've got, in the case of my cartoon here, I've got 20 onions, and I'll give you 20 onions if you give me your cow. Now, another thing about informal economies is that informal economies are going to usually be made up. If they're not in a developing nation, with you have the small-scale trade and markets. If you have an informal economy in the developed area, like the United States or Canada, it's typically from some sort of illegal activity. Selling drugs, moonshining, prostitution. Unfortunately, that's part of it. That is considered an informal economy because it's not taxed. It's also considered to be small-scale trade and barter. Give something for something. Formal economies is essentially what we have, the exact opposite, what we have here in the United States. We have taxes, we have tariffs, we have large-scale trade, we have people, markets all over. Next time you're at the grocery store, take a look at some of where the produce comes from. You're going to see some things. My alarm's going off in there. I don't know if you can hear it. I've got a music alarm. It's playing Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Swede. It's funny. All right. So formal economies, Do not rely on illegal activities. They do not rely on barter. But if you're go next time you go to the convenience or grocery store, take a look at where the produce comes from. A lot of it you're going to find is coming from, say, California, especially when it comes to strawberries this time of year. Strawberries, a lot of fruit, a lot of citrus come from California. And that's just part of our formal economy. And with a formal economy, you're going to be paying taxes on these things. So real quick, what countries do you think have informal economies as a big part? That doesn't make much sense. So what countries do you think are usually going to have informal economies and why? Once again, there's no one involved right now. No one's logged in. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this for now. If you want to answer it on this Collaborate board, go ahead and pause the video now, and you can get into the next one. Move on when you're ready. Slide 16, World Systems Theory. This was actually developed by a guy, a Polish man by the name of Emanuel Wallerstein. And Wallerstein comes up with this theory that he says is a direct consequence of imperialism. It's called the World Systems Theory. What he does with this World Systems Theory is he divides the world into 3 segments. All countries are in one of these 3 segments. And how you can put these countries, classify these countries into one of these segments is how these countries relate to each other, international relations, history, sociology. In red, you have the core. Those are going to be your big countries that are highly developed, places like the United States, Australia, Britain, Canada. And with these core areas, these core nations, their main motive is to look for high profit consumption goods. They want to look for the cheap labor and cheap raw materials. They want to manufacture that labor and materials into something high profit consumer good, and they want to sell it back to the rest of the world. So let's say a country like the United States finds out that there's a massive oil area in sub-Saharan Africa, like in Kenya, Africa. Well, according to this theory, these high profit or core highly developed states are going to want to go to Africa and try to get that oil. After which parts, because it's cheap in Africa, they can actually take it back, the oil back to the United States or back to Saudi Arabia or back to Britain. They can process that oil, that crude oil, into gasoline and then turn around and sell it back to everyone else. In blue, we have the semi-periphery. Those are developing countries. They're kind of caught in between. So they do a little bit. They do some trade with the core areas, but they're still looking to do the same thing. Have these consumption goods that they can sell to these periphery areas, as well as being able to buy cheap labor and cheap raw materials from those periphery areas. And the periphery is going to be your undeveloped countries. Places that are still kind of these backwards, not a large population, not a lot of large cities, not a very stable government. And that is trying the people who, to survive, they're needing to export this cheap labor and cheap raw materials to the core and the semi-periphery. And as a result, they can get a little bit of what the core and semi-periphery are producing with that labor and materials. It's a bit of a heavy topic, I realize, and it goes into a little bit when it comes to international equality, equity, and social justice. But just kind of roll with us on this one. We're going to get you through this as best we can. So here's another map, slide 17. The core areas are going to be in blue. United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, Japan. The semi-periphery are these developing countries, which are actually wanting to kind of work in the middle there. Places like China, Iran, India, South Africa, Argentina, and Brazil. And everyone else is essentially going to be considered a periphery. Those are in red. Most of Africa is considered periphery. Now, needless to say, some people have some arguments over this. We'll take a look at those arguments at a later date, probably on either Monday or Wednesday. Some people say that this kind of misses the mark. However, we're just looking to understand exactly how our guy Wallenstein actually saw the world when he was writing his stuff. In fact, I just discovered this morning Wallenstein actually passed away in August of last year. So 2019, he just passed away. So his stuff is still really current. All right, slide 18. Once again, you're going to be going to answer this in your own words. What is development? And also to describe the differences between a more developed country and a less developed country using some real world examples. So this will require you to do a little bit of research on your part. And our last slide is a link. Ladies and gentlemen, we're bringing back Albert. Yes, it's true. Albert did end back on March 3rd. That's when our pilot program ended, Monday, March 3rd. However, given that we are now doing these distance learnings and online courses, the good folks at Albert have actually reopened it for everyone. So Albert is open again, and I've assigned you a 16-question kind of a review of what we've looked at this past week. Of those 16 questions, 10 of them are rated as easy. You should all be able to get them. As long as you're paying attention and reading it carefully, you should be able to get those. 5 are going to be considered moderate, which are not too hard, but they do require a little bit of heavier thinking. And there is 1 difficult. So make sure you go ahead and get that done, turned in. I'll put the link on Google Classroom for you guys to go to Albert and do this. That being said, we will be providing you once again with more information on the AP exam, what it's going to be like, how this is going on. AP has changed a few things, but unfortunately, AP does not want to just cut the tests altogether. And the reason is that tests, each district is paying AP like $95 per student. So if they were to cut it all together, they'd be losing millions this 1 year. Personally, if I were in charge, I'd say let's go ahead and just, scrap it and pick it up next year. Unfortunately, AP has decided not to do that, so it is still going to be going on. There will be a little bit more when it comes to going into things like constructed response, free writing, getting some practice in to do constructed responses. That's always going to be important. So make sure you go ahead and get these done. You're actually going to be seeing more constructed response questions from Albert with these Nearpods. So that's where we stand right now. We'll be keeping you informed. Before I turn off this live stream, make sure that you are going to myap.collegeboard.org and you're getting that taken care of. Make sure you can log in. If you can't, then you're going to have to reset your password. If you use the ebrschools.org email address, you're going to have to actually call AP, talk to them, and they'll give you a temporary password to go in and reset everything. So make sure you're getting that done. I will be posting a Spanish translation in Espanol for my students. That's going to be coming up very shortly. Hopefully, I'll have it done by 3:30 and get all that posted on Google Classroom. In the meantime, guys, enjoy your weekend. I'll see you again on Monday at 2 o'clock. Take care.